It's Sunday the 19th of April, and we are reaching a sort of critical stage in the coronavirus pandemic. What to do next? I mean, in the Sunday Times this morning there's an article by Rod Liddell, a very controversial journalist. He seems to have done a fair bit of troughing since I last came across him 40 years ago as a sort of scrawny youth in his DMs, but that's another story. In this article he is very scathing of scientists. I'll just read it out. If you listen to the BBC or read newspaper columns and headlines, you will hear the scientists treated with a benevolence verging on reverence, their opinions rarely challenged. This is partly because most of us journos are arts or social science grads. We are completely out of our depth and thus have a touching blind faith in science and a terribly mistaken belief that it delivers unassailable objective truths, shorn of ideology and politicking. He then goes on to absolutely slate Neil Ferguson from Imperial College, who has been the sort of driving force behind this lockdown policy. And I think his bias against scientists is very much coloured by what has happened in Neil Ferguson's career over the years and the forecasts which he has made, which turn out to be absolutely baseless. Anyway, let's go on. I want to look at fear. Sort of fear engendered by this pandemic situation which we find ourselves in. And following that, I look at teams, committees, those who are making the decisions which affect our lives. How good are they? As with previous videos, the easiest way for me to do this is to make a hard copy of it and then just read it out. Yesterday I went for a long walk deep into the countryside and experienced a feeling of utter relief. Without being conscious of it, I realised that for the past month I had been living a life full of apprehension, sort of an undercurrent of fear, and the walk just lifted it from me. I felt renewed, sort of ready to take on anything. I'm very lucky in that I live amongst beautiful countryside and I have a garden. And if I feel like this, how many others in much worse situations must feel the same, or even worse? This sort of insidious feeling is destroying the society we knew. Suspicion is everywhere. Yesterday, whilst lawfully taking exercise on their bikes or cycles, two people close to me were taken aback when, on stopping in a village to refresh themselves after a particularly strenuous stretch, a resident dived out of his house and took their photograph. Nothing was said, but it was obviously intended to intimidate them. The whole country is gripped by fear. Fear of catching corona flu, fear of the police, fear of domestic violence, fear of going out, fear of being spied upon by our neighbours, fear of financial ruin, fear of losing our jobs, fear of never working again, fear of never seeing elderly loved ones again, fear of delays for non-essential operations, or fear of delays in diagnostic testing for life-threatening diseases and conditions, fear about the cancellation of exams, fear of making a wrong decision, especially in politicians, fear of facing the interrogators of TV and other media, who for the most part, they're just polishing their own egos. And I'm sure you could add others. But what has brought this on? Now, unfortunately, and it has to be said, it's a result of ignorance, especially of science, and more essentially, scientific method. This ignorance is especially dangerous in those who have to make decisions based on scientific evidence. If the evidence is not thorough, is not challenged by the best brains, is not put up against alternatives which may be more robust, and is accepted as the best simply because the exponents of that work shout the loudest and denigrate the alternatives with no evidence to back it up, we are in trouble. Was the Imperial College model challenged? On the available evidence, it would seem not. One of the biggest problems today, it's easy to shout loud. It's easy to denigrate others, often in the most vile, brutal, cowardly and anonymous way using the internet. In this neck of the woods, sheep predominate. And the fields are full of lambs revelling in the best spring weather we've had for years. Yet those who would benefit most aren't allowed to do so. The one thing you quickly notice about sheep, like all herd animals, is that if one is startled and starts running, the rest don't think, what's she running for? They think, I don't care why she's running, but I must also run. And a sort of human equivalent. If she's plunging the bog roll aisle, then I must plunge it, but I haven't a clue why. But after running a few yards, the sheep all think, what are we running for, stupid? And they stop. And sort of human equivalent is suddenly the shelves are full of bog rolls. We're all back to normal. Many years ago there was an excellent episode on that wonderful programme, Horizon. A chap had 100 tubes, each containing a spider, which had built a web across the tube. Now he suspended a piece of fine string from the lid of the tube, letting it rest on the web without damaging it, but preventing it from vibrating properly if an insect landed on it. 95 of the spiders abandoned their webs. 4 cut round the string, leaving it hanging freely so it didn't interfere with the vibration of the web. But one attached a piece of string to a thread of web, went up the side of the tube to the lid, hauled the string up and stuck it to the lid. It was amazing. We desperately need more human equivalents of that spider. So-called lateral thinkers, independent thinkers, fearless thinkers, especially those who govern us, who make the decisions which affect all our lives. In 1981, a book titled Management Teams was published. The author was a man called Meredith Belbin. For 10 years he had studied the behaviour of teams, and he had come to the conclusion that the most successful teams were not those with the most intellectuals, in other words, the most brainy people, but those with a balance of different behaviours within the team. And he concluded that there were 9 types, and he gave them each a name. And these are they. The first type was called Lateral, creative, unorthodox, generator of ideas, a buffin. But they aren't very good at timing and can be disruptive by introducing new ideas, late in the process. And then you get the resource investigators. These are good at networking. They're enthusiastic, seekers of solutions, from elsewhere. But they tend to lose enthusiasm, when the process is sort of nearing completion. And the coordinator, confident, sees the big picture, recognises talent, and is a good delegator. They tend to be the team leaders, but their main problem is if they over-delegate, others can see them as born idle. And then the shapers. These are task-focused, dynamic extroverts. They push things along, but they can be aggressive if things aren't going well. And then, very important, the monitor evaluators. These are unbiased people, and they can see all the options clearly. They're analytical, but sometimes they sort of dampen enthusiasm. And team workers. There tend to be more of these. These are sort of diplomatic, smoothers of troubled waters, non-confrontational, but they tend to be indecisive. And then the implementers. These are the people who turn ideas into action plans. They're very loyal. They tend to accept tasks which others avoid, but their main downside is that they can be inflexible. And second from last, the completer finisher, the perfectionist. They double check everything, but they don't trust anybody in the checking. They're unable to delegate it because they don't trust the ability of others. And finally, the specialist. These are the people who tend to be brought in depending on the task in hand, and they're very knowledgeable in their field, and most of them are very keen to pass the knowledge on. They're always striving to improve their knowledge, but they're not normally interested in what else is going on in the team. Now, how balanced are the teams solving the problems of this pandemic? Well, you'll have to make up your own mind. But when this book was published, it revolutionised management teams, and lots of companies sprang up offering courses on team building, to which companies sent their employees, whether they were willing or not. I seem to remember going on 2 of them. Some of these team building exercises were based on indoor exercises, things like building towers and bridges from milk straws, etc. I remember. But others were based on outdoor activities. One such comes to mind, and it was based on the end of a peninsula in remote northern Scotland. On the way there, the whole lot, all the participants, were tipped out of a Land Rover on the opposite side of the peninsula and told to make their own way there. They were all dressed in sort of indoor clothes. And it was blowing a gale with horizontal sleet. Their behaviour was monitored throughout, and daily reports were compiled on each individual. And apart from the stupidity of the first exercise, there are two others which stand out. One man, he was a senior executive of a major company. He had a fear of heights, but he was persuaded by the others in the group, to climb the mast of a ship and stand on the top. Now, second, equally senior, he had a fear of water, but he was persuaded, in fact he was goaded in fact, into jumping into the sea and swimming under the boat to emerge on the other side. Now, this is all very good for their confidence, but peer group pressure at its best. Not a good thing when difficult decisions have to be made at work. One man, a Norwegian, he was the most senior of all in his career, and he was also the oldest in the group. I don't know what he would be, 60. But he was totally uncooperative. He wouldn't be jollied along into anything he didn't want to do, which was almost everything. He really didn't want to be there. I mean, viewers were privy to the leader's assessments every evening of each participant, and he came in for some dreadful stick. I mean, final reports, most of them were glowing, were written and sent to each participant's company. Now, there was a follow-up to this, and during the follow-up, only the Norwegian had made significant advancement in his company. None of the others had. A bit of an eye-opener. As part of these assessments, some companies sent their employees a questionnaire. It was a really long thing, with really weird questions in which there were no right and wrong answers. This is what they got back, which had a big bearing on the employee's future career within the company, for good or ill. Which I suspect was a real eye-opener. Well, you might be thinking, what's this got to do with this coronavirus pandemic? Well, there were too many sheep. If there were any plants or monetary evaluators, they were ignored or put down by the shouty lot. They just weren't strong enough to challenge what was going on. There were too many who succumbed to peer group pressure without rhyme or reason. Those who shouted loudest in committee, or even worse, in the media, were more likely to be listened to, and they manipulated the strategies. No one so far has had the stomach and guts to risk their political career by making bold but slightly risky moves to get it out of this. But somebody's going to have to do it. I mean, who will be the first? Will it be Boris? Not if that dreadful decision to introduce the Corona Bill 2020 has anything to do with it. And that's just something, a little reminder, what everybody should be aware of, which was on an earlier video. Anyway, as the lockdown continues, keep safe. And I'll see you again. Take care, bye-bye.